Hello and welcome. In this lecture, I want to tie some of the concepts that we've learned in this section, a lot of the graphical user interface concepts, kind of want to tie a couple of them together and show you a real project that uses some of these concepts that we've learned. So I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to close this one. So in this new project, I'm just going to name it arithmetic example because it's going to be an application that just performs some arithmetic. I'm going to leave everything as default, like normal. So the API version is going to be API 15, and I'm going to create it with an empty activity. So this application is going to just, I'm going to create a couple text fields, a couple buttons, and I'm going to try to interact and see how you can handle events and also set different attributes for different widgets. So right now we're going to leave the main activity blank. In the activity main, we're going to delete the default hello world, and we're going to add some widgets. So just to give you a little overview, I want to use a constraint layout. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to create a text field. I'm going to create some buttons. I'm going to try to do some basic arithmetic like plus, minus, divide. And when I do each one, I'm going to change some properties of widgets. So we'll come together and be more clear once I start dragging and dropping things. But the first thing I want to do is I want to add a new edit text. So I'm going to drag and drop an edit text right around in the center here. I'm going to drag all my widgets from first, and then I'm going to set their attributes. What I also want is I want a text view below it. I want to make it a little larger. This is going to contain the operator that we're going to perform for the arithmetic. So the first text field is going to be an operand. Second one's going to be an operator. I also want to add some buttons that are going to control what operation we do. Let's make this a little larger and then have two buttons on each side of it. The buttons don't need to be too big because they're just going to contain the operator. I'm just copying and pasting them and dragging them over so they're the right size. It's just a little shortcut. Just doing a Control C and V and then dragging them over. So 4 buttons, one each for plus, minus, divide, and subtract. And then I want to add another edit text below that. This will contain the second operand. It's not the best designed interface, but it's really just to illustrate how we can set properties of widgets and handle events. Then we're going to have another text view below that. This one is going to just contain the equals operator. And then below that, we're also going to have a text view for the result. And then below that, we're going to have a button to do the calculation. So let's infer the constraints. It's going to mess it up a little. Let's see if we can line them up a little bit better. The layout's not that as important. I did want to have more in the center, but and the widget, this one more. I guess that's good enough for now. So we have our constraints. Now we just want to give some attribute properties. For our name, we're going to want to give it a property for its ID. We'll just call this edit text first operand. I like to include the widget name and then some unique name that describes the widget. So edit text first operand. We also don't need any default text there. I'm going to delete that, and I'm just going to leave it as it is. The button we're just going to name button plus because that will be our plus button. And this is going to have text to just say plus. Our next button is going to be named button minus. And this is going to have text, just a minus. Could make them bigger too at some point. This text view is going to display the current selected operand. So here we're going to name it text view operator, or I should say the current selected operator. An operator is the plus, minus, divide, or multiply. So we'll name that operator. We don't need to have anything in here. Well, by default, we'll have the plus in here. We're also going to make this appearance large. We want it a little bit bigger. Whoops. And we also want to make the font a little bigger, so we'll just say font, or I think it's text size. We'll just make it 36, as big as we can. We also want to modify the gravity so that it's centered. We'll make this center vertical and center horizontal. Okay, our third button is going to be our multiply button, so we'll call this one button multiply, and for the default text we'll just put in an asterisk. And for our last button, we're going to make that button divide, and we're going to have that at divide as well. For our next text field, this is going to be our second operand. So what we're going to call this is edit text second operand. And we're going to leave this empty. Our text view is just going to have an equals symbol. We don't need an ID for this because we're not going to modify it, and we're not going to need to retrieve the data. So we can just say equals. Let's make this large for the appearance, and also make the text size a little bit bigger. And let's also make the gravity correct. Again, making the center vertical and center horizontal. Our last text view is going to be our result. So we'll just name this text view result. And we'll also want to center this and make it a little bit bigger. So let's make it large. Let's make it 36. And let's make the gravity center. And then our last button is going to be our calculate button. So we can just say button calculate for this. And we want to add the text for that to say calculate. And now the only thing we're missing is we need our properties to set our on clicks. So we'll type an on click for all of our things that we need to set. So we need an on click for each button. So for each button, we're going to just call it something like something that's descriptive. So for this, we'll say plus button pressed. For minus, we'll say minus button pressed. For multiply, we'll say multiply button pressed. And for divide, we'll say divide button pressed. And then for the calculate, we'll call it calculate button pressed. And so we can easily add these event handlers. We still have a lot of mistakes because we didn't create any resources, just because of time. We could create resources for all those texts, but because we're limited on time, I'm just going to go ahead. We know how to create resources. We know it's good practice to create resources, so you need to do it. Just for time efficiencies, I'm going to skip that for now. So on the onClick method, we can just highlight that, and we can start creating our methods, our event handlers, I should say. This will automatically generate them. Again, concepts we've learned previously. So it just takes a couple of minutes. And then our last one, calculate. And so the other thing we always want to do here is we want to work in small steps and constantly test. So now that we have the methods created, let's build and compile. We should have probably built and compiled a little bit earlier. So let's build and compile, and let's make sure it runs okay. We should also be testing in multiple screens in our layout editor as well. So let's run this. And this is just going to show you the graphical user interface. Again, the whole point of this application is just do a simple arithmetic operation. What we're going to do is we're going to put in a number here, and we're going to put a number in here. And then depending on what we select, the text in here is going to change. And then what we want to do is hit the calculate, and the text view will change as well. It does look a little, let's modify it a bit. I want to, this is a little too low. I also don't want the text view to show up. So let's blank that out. And let's also set the background for this plus to something default. Just so, just a background color, just so we can notice the difference. For now, we'll just default it to some color. We'll just call it, I don't know, what's a good one? We'll do red. And so it's just going to default to red. So now our second step of the program is we have to implement the code. So here we want to do certain things on to handle different events. And so I have written some code already because a lot of it is tedious. What we want to do is the calculate button we're going to implement first because this is doing the bulk of the work. And we're going to need to access our resources. Mainly, we're going to need to access our 2 edit texts for our operands and our 2 text views. So we know how to access resources. We can use the find view by ID method and pass in the ID. So this first edit text is our first operand. Second edit text is our second operand. On line 32, that's the operator we want to read so we know what arithmetic to perform, plus, minus, divide, or multiplication. The text result is what we're going to set for the result. The next thing we need to do is we need to get the string values for each one of these widgets. So here we can create some string objects, and for each one of our string objects we can use the resource, in this case 2 edit text, we can call the getText method. The getText method will retrieve the text that the user entered in the edit text widget, and then you call toString on it to convert it to a string. The last one is the operator string. This is a text view. You still call the getText method on it, and you call toString. So now we are able to retrieve all the input by the user, and we can start performing our calculation. Before we perform our calculation, though, we have to convert some of the operands, the 2 operands, to doubles. So we have to create 2 doubles, and we just call the double the parse double method of the. It's a static method in the double class. We just pass it in the string, so it converts it to a double. The next thing I want to do is I want to write a case statement that will do all of our work setting the text fields. So I'm going to copy and paste this in, but I'm going to explain it. So we initialize a value. The value is going to be what is stored in the result text field. We have to initialize that to 0. We're then going to switch on our operator string because we have to see what the user entered for plus, minus, divide, or star. We got to see which one they entered. And so we read it on line 37. We read it from the edit text field. And now, depending on what it is, we want to perform arithmetic. So if it's a divide, in line 46, we're going to do a division. In line 47, we're going to set our result text field to whatever the result was. We have to convert some things to strings now because we now have a double. We now have to convert it back to a string so we can call set text. In lines 49, if it's multiply, we then want to multiply. and convert our double to a string. In line 54, if it's minus, we want to minus and convert our double to a string. And the same goes for plus. So just to reiterate, in lines 30 to 33, we grabbed our resources by passing in the resource ID and using the find view by ID method. In lines 35 to 37, we converted our resources that were entered by the user to strings. In lines 38 and 39, we then converted those strings to doubles because we need to do arithmetic on it. And then the rest of the code is using a case statement to determine what arithmetic we want to do and then converting the strings back to doubles. So the other thing I want to do now is I want to implement each one of the other handler methods to basically just set the text color of each text field and change the operator that we're using. So if plus button is pressed, what I want to do now, if the plus button is pressed, is I want to get our operator widget, our text view that shows the plus, minus, or whichever one is selected. I want to set the text color of that text field to white. I want to set the text color. And then the background color, I want to set to magenta. And then I want to set the text field to whatever I selected on the button. So for the minus, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to set the text field to minus and change the background color, just to show you how we can use some text view methods to change attributes. Multiply, same thing, just change it to a different color. And then divide, the same thing, but change it to a different color. So a lot of tedious code here to just set attributes of widgets, and also the calculate button that has some logic. But again, what I'm doing here in each one of these event handlers for the button presses for the operators is I'm getting the text view to see what was selected, or I know what was selected by the event handler. I'm getting the text view so that I can set that text view to what is current selection. I'm changing the color, the background color, the text color, and the background color for that text view, and then setting the text of whatever was called for that method. So let's build and run, and we can see our simple application and how it works. So by default, it's going to come up. Everything's going to be empty. It's going to be plus by default. Each time we select one of these buttons, we should change it to text inside there and change the background color. So if I select minus, it's going to change the background to black and the text to red. If I select divide, it's going to be black and yellow. If I select multiply, it's going to be blue and white. If I select plus, it's going to be magenta and plus white. So these buttons are selecting the operation that I want to perform by setting the operator. Here, when I enter numbers, 6, and if I enter my next text field, something like 8, now, depending on what was selected, the plus, when I hit calculate, it's going to say 6 plus 8 and put the result in the bottom text field. So I say calculate, and it displays 14. And I probably need to move that up a bit. If I change that to minus and say calculate, it's going to be a negative 2. If I say multiply and calculate, it's going to be 48. If I say divide, calculate, it's going to be 0.75. And that's why I use the double for the divide. If I change this to 16, everything's going to work still because it's going to read the current value in the event handlers. Now when I say calculate, it's going to say 2. If I multiply, it's going to say 128. If I minus, it's going to say 8.0. So really just a simple application that demonstrates some of the concepts we learned in this section by modifying some text view widgets, changing the background color and setting the text. Also retrieving user input in the form of text from an edit text control, and then event handlers for buttons. So a pretty good discussion or pretty good demo on those concepts. Hopefully you came to understand them a little bit more clear by this example. Thank you.